Why Joe Biden could have been a character on Gilligan's Island. Coming up next on Come On Now. Those of us of a certain age grew up watching Gilligan's Island and syndicated reruns on TV. This was back before streaming, when syndicated reruns were a thing. And in one of the episodes of Gilligan's Island, actually one of my favorite episodes, there was a character called W.W. Feldman. He was a pilot, and he was actually the worst pilot in any Air Corps in World War I. He was so bad as a pilot, in fact, that he was known to have bombed his own airfield. So he shows up in an episode of Gilligan's Island, and all the castaways are depending on W.W. Feldman to get them off of the island. Well, there was one thing they didn't really count on, which is that W.W. meant wrong way, as in wrong way Feldman. Here's a little clip from the show and why the castaways remain castaways.
Oh, so we're down there at the beach.
Let me see that. I charted my course for Honolulu, but oddly enough, I lost my bearings when I flew into the eye of a violent cloud. Somehow, I landed on a beautiful tropical island and have finally found the paradise I was looking for. Although I'm probably not as happy as you are, it's good enough for me. Maybe next time I'll make it to Honolulu. Best wishes, W.W. Feldman.
So wrong way Feldman didn't save the day. A lot of folks voted for Joe Biden thinking he was going to save the day from Donald Trump in the last 4 years of his administration. Instead of saving the day, though, we're getting some really weird things going on. There is a crisis happening on the border right now. Whether Biden wants to call it a crisis or not doesn't really matter. It's a crisis. Even CBS News says it's a humanitarian crisis.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We're going to begin with a humanitarian crisis on the southern border that is growing larger and more dire by the day. Tonight, we have got the stunning new numbers. Sources tell CBS News more than 13,000 migrant children who entered the country without their parents are now in U.S. custody. The government says even more adults are being turned back every day. The Secretary of Homeland Security admitting today that so many people are now crossing the border, his department is on pace to stop more migrants than in the past 20 years. And with so many children, including toddlers, now flooding into the country, CBS News has learned the Biden administration is running out of space to house them and people to process their claims. Now, President Biden said today he has no plans to visit the border right now. And DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says while the situation is difficult, his department is tackling it. But critics of Mr. Biden, including Republicans in Congress, are blaming the president tonight for rolling back the strict border policies of the Trump administration.
So CBS News calling it a humanitarian crisis, Joe Biden doesn't. We can play games all day on the words. The fact is, it's a crisis. Biden started another little crisis this week. He gave a softball interview to George Stephanopoulos at ABC News. By the way, George Stephanopoulos worked for the Clinton administration. He's been a Democrat operative his entire adult life. Why ABC News treats him as an objective journalist, I don't know, other than the fact that they're not objective either. In any case, Stephanopoulos does this softball interview with Biden to try and set Biden up to look good. And instead, Biden has this to say about Russian President Vladimir Putin.
You think he's a killer?
Mm-hmm. I do.
So what price must he pay?
The price he's going to pay, well, you'll see shortly.
Okay, so I haven't been a Secretary of State, and so I haven't been in charge of the diplomatic relations for an entire country. It still seems to me it's not a good idea to just go out of your way to insult the president of another country, particularly one like Vladimir Putin, who's bound to react. Well, he did react the very day after the interview with Stephanopoulos went on the air. Vladimir Putin pulled his diplomat, his ambassador, from the United States and pulled him back to Moscow for consultations. This is a way of saying, we're not happy with you. We don't like what you did. We're not yet in the mode where we might start a war, but we're expressing some displeasure. It spread farther just from Putin across the entire Russian government. Folks in the Duma and elsewhere across the government all loudly renounced Biden for insulting Putin. And look, I'm not here to carry any water for Vladimir Putin. I don't like him. I'm glad he's not the ruler of my country. But on the other hand, Biden was supposed to not do this sort of thing. Many people who voted for Joe Biden wanted him to, restore America's place in the world. They wanted him to do better by America and undo the embarrassment of the last 4 years in their minds. Biden isn't giving them that. He's giving them instead this crisis on the border, which is of his own making. He made the crisis on the border by the things he said during the campaign, and he's making that crisis now. When he came into office and said he was going to undo the Remain in Mexico policy, and he did, and when he undid the border and when he pulled back from security, well, this is what we're getting. We're getting a border crisis. And he's creating this little mini crisis with Russia, which we just have to hope at this point doesn't spiral out of control. This is why Joe Biden reminds me of Wrong-Way Feldman from Gilligan's Island. The fact is, Robert Gates, who was Secretary of Defense during the Obama years when Biden was vice president, said in his memoir that Joe Biden has been wrong on every foreign policy issue of the last 40 years. Gates was asked about that later on, and he stood by that quote. Gates knows what he's talking about. He's been around government forever. He's been around international relations forever. So has Joe Biden. But he's managed to get everything wrong. He actually got both Iraq wars wrong. He's probably the only person in Washington who managed to do that. And now he's getting this wrong with Russia, and he's getting this wrong with Mexico and with our border. In fact, on the whole Wrong-Way Feldman thing, Biden came in and said he was going to undo all of Trump's policies, and specifically he wanted to undo working with Mexico to secure the border. Well, on the day I'm shooting this, Biden came out in a story in the New York Times saying, hey, Mexico, maybe we want to start these deals again. This guy shouldn't be learning on the job. He's been in government for 47, 48 years, longer than most Americans have been alive. And yet he still doesn't know what he's doing. And this on-the-job training is creating disaster after disaster after disaster. If you think Joe Biden is the guy who's going to save America, I'm sorry. Come on now. I'm Bryan Preston.